There are days where I don't believe that it happened. These are the best days, because then I can get through work without a panic attack. I can pretend the nightmare was just that, a nightmare. The sun rises, the dream fades, and life carries on like normal. But every time I open my phone and see the group chat's last message, a skull emoji sent by my friend Jamie 6 months ago, it all comes crashing back. The flames of fear consume me, and the vines of survivor's guilt immobilize me, and I'm taken back to that world, the land of the woven trees. My therapist says writing about it might help. I don't think writing to strangers online is what she had in mind, but she probably doesn't believe me anyways. Not that I blame her. The whole thing sounds like a teenager's bad creepypasta, and I've given up on trying to explain it to everyone. Well, everyone decides those who come across this post. So congratulations on finding this, the one and only place I'll tell the story of what really happened on the Woven Tree Trail. Jamie and I were sitting on a bench outside the guest center, our backpacks leaning against the table. You know, I'm pretty sure smoking is illegal in public parks, I said to Jamie. No one gives a damn, she said, blowing another puff of the joint. Besides, we're about to go hiking for a week. I need to get in a hit when I can, you know. Alright, I'm sure everyone's going to love breathing in weed as they're hiking. Jamie gave me a small push, but laughed. Hey, I'm not that bad. We heard the crunching of footsteps on gravel, and turned to see my boyfriend, Grant, walk up from behind. Our guide is here, he told us. Oh damn, Jamie said, extinguishing the joint, and quickly tucking it into her jacket pocket. In her haste, she dropped the lighter to the ground. Let's hope he doesn't have a good sense of smell, I quipped. Picking up the lighter, Jamie rolled her eyes, then looked at the lighter in my hand. Maybe you can hold on to that so I don't get tempted, she said. Deal. The three of us walked towards the rest of our group. There were 6 of us in total: Jamie, my best friend, and fellow engineer, Grant, my boyfriend and aspiring photographer, Tasha, and Spencer, who were partners and medical students, Trevor, a college senior, and the newest member of our group, and myself. We'd all met in a backpacking club at college and stayed in touch since. We were having our annual backpacking trip, this time around a loop called the Woven Tree Trail. None of us had hiked it, but our trail guide had pretty good reviews online, so we figured we'd give it a shot. Tasha, Spencer, and Trevor were standing around a short man that looked to be in his 50s or 60s. He had a thin, wiry frame with light brown skin that reminded me of the surrounding trees. If there was anyone fit to be a trail guide, it would be him, I thought. He wore a dark green bucket hat, a tan collared shirt, black shorts, and carried a backpack that probably weighed as much as him. Good day everyone, he said, his voice soft like leaves. My name's Rowan, and I'll be your guide through the Woven Tree Trail. He slid off his backpack with startling ease and opened a side pocket, pulling out a handful of bracelets. Each one looked like a bundle of twigs woven into a circular shape, some with leaves still attached to them. Rowan began handing them out individually. These are safety bracelets, designed courtesy of the park, he explained. Each one is equipped with a GPS tag that I can keep track of using my own. I won't be with you for much of the hike, but the trail itself is fairly straightforward. The trackers are just in case someone gets stuck or turned around. Rowan gave me one of the bracelets, which I studied. It really did just look like a bunch of twigs knotted together, but as I slipped it onto my wrist, I felt it attach itself to me. I assumed it was the sensation of whatever hardware was embedded among the sticks. This is pretty sweet actually, Jamie said, showing off her own to me. They've definitely got the theming down, I said. I'll be serving breakfast and dinner every day at our campsites, Rowan told us, putting on his backpack again. Lunch and any other meals are up to you. Any questions? Before we begin, how do you want us to pay you? Tasha asked. I have Venmo, but if you only take cash then I'll have to wait until after the hike to drive to an ATM. No need to worry about payment, Rowan said. I'm sure we'll have it figured out by the end of the hike. Any more questions? None of us said anything else. Oh yes, one more thing before we begin. He stared at us with his pale green eyes. I'd suggest you don't fall behind. Without elaboration, Rowan started down the trail, and I couldn't help but notice my stomach churn at those words. The morning hike passed uneventfully. Sometimes I walked with others, catching up on our lives and gossiping. Other times I walked by myself, soaking in the surrounding nature. Most days I'd be working my boring office job, so any opportunity to break from routine and return to the outdoors was one I'd take full advantage of. It was perfect backpacking weather too. The sun shone gently through the trees, the temperature hovering in the 60s. I could use more of this, I thought. We had a quick lunch together, then broke off into groups again for the afternoon part of the hike. I ended up walking with Grant, who stopped frequently to take pictures with his Polaroid. "You're gonna run out of film by the end of the day if you keep that up," I said. "That's why I brought 2 extra packs," Grant said, pointing the camera at a ladybug crawling up a fern. "Well, we don't want to take too long. You remember what Rowan said about falling behind, right?" Grant shrugged. "We're near the front. Besides, he probably meant that for, like, inexperienced hikers who need a water break every 15 minutes. He took out the film and put it in a plastic bag. "True. Instead, there's you who needs a picture break every 5 minutes," I said. Grant rolled his eyes. We walked in silence for a few more minutes before Grant stopped. "Whoa," he said. "Babe, look at that. Another picture break." "No, look at that tree," Grant said, pointing off the trail. I followed his finger and saw what he was referring to. To the left of us, maybe 200 feet away, was the most gargantuan tree I had ever seen. It was easily the width of a car, maybe longer, but perhaps most striking was its structure. It looked like 100 tree trunks woven together, twisting and looping and turning like the veins of some primordial giant. "This must be what the woven trees are," I said. Grant, unsurprisingly, pulled out his camera again to take a picture. "Hopefully there are more of them further up so I can get a closer shot." We kept hiking, spotting more of the woven trees as we did. Most weren't as big as the first, but all were large enough to dwarf the surrounding trees, and tall enough that we couldn't even see their tops through the canopy. They were all relatively far from the trail, almost like the trees wished to hide from less observant hikers. We reached the campsite in the late afternoon, where Rowan was hunched over a crackling fire, stirring something in a pot. "Congrats on being the first ones," Rowan said, not taking his eyes off his task. "How long have you been here?" I asked, admiring the old man's speed. "Long enough to start up dinner," Rowan said. He closed the pot lid. "I assume the others are close behind." I shrugged. "Not sure. I don't think they were too far back though. You've got to see some of these pictures we got," Grant said, pulling out his plastic bag. There were these massive trees that looked like a bunch of trunks combined. "You know, there's a legend about those trees," Rowan said, his voice layered with passion. "They say that the woven trees are the remnants of ancient gods. These gods used to rule the land, but as time passed they gradually sank more and more into the ground until they grew roots and became the trees. The legend says that if you touch one of the trees at night, you will turn into wood and become woven into the tree. They look kind of like the bracelets you gave us," I said, holding out my wrist. Rowan gave a proud smile. "I'm glad someone noticed that detail. I wonder how such a plant even exists." Grant said, "Is it literally hundreds of trees growing together, or one giant tree? Because if it's all one, then surely it's the tallest in the world, right?" Rowan shrugged. "Not much is known about the woven trees. They're unique only to this part of the world, and this trail is the only way humans can see them." Gradually, the rest of the group reached the camp. Tasha and Spencer arrived together, then Jamie, and right behind her, Trevor. "Looks like you're the loser," Tasha teased when Trevor walked into camp. He rolled his eyes. "Hey, I'm carrying the most food out of us all." "Okay," Trevor said, smiling. "So if you want to be fed, you better be quiet." They all had a surprisingly delicious dinner of cooked veggies, beans, and rice. Sitting around the fire, we exchanged stories of incidents from the previous 5 hours. Apparently, Spencer had accidentally dropped his water bottle into a creek, which took him and Tasha nearly half an hour to get. Rowan also told them stories of previous times he'd hiked the woven tree trail, some alone, some leading other backpackers. "I think this is the largest group I've hiked with," he said. "Definitely more than I'm used to, but it's exciting." It slowly grew dark. Trevor, citing stomach pain, went back to his tent first. Soon, everyone else retired to their sleeping bags in preparation of a long hike tomorrow, including Rowan. Before long, it was just Jamie and I sitting around the dying fire. We were quiet for a while before Jamie broke the silence. "Why aren't there any stars in the sky?" she said, gazing upward. "Jamie, did you smoke that joint again?" I said, nudging her. "No, well, maybe a little," Jamie said, the orange fire lighting her smile. "But seriously though, this is sober Jamie asking. Why don't I see anything in the sky?" I followed her gaze and looked up. While the trees likely blocked most of the overhead, there should have been at least a few pinpricks of light poking through the leaves. Instead, there was nothing, not even the moon, which would have risen by now. "You're right," I said. "Did it become cloudy? Maybe this is a sign for me to quit smoking," Jamie said. She stood up and yawned, and also a sign for me to go to sleep. "Good night, Ash." "Good night, Jamie." I sat there for a few more minutes on my own, looking at the sky, trying to rationalize what I was seeing, or rather, what I wasn't seeing. Eventually, I convinced myself that I was tired from the hike, doused the embers with water, and retreated to my tent. But I couldn't shake off the feeling of my stomach churning, as if to warn me of what's to come. The next morning, Rowan had an announcement. Earlier today, Trevor decided to leave. He told us he was experiencing a lot of pain, so we walked over to a nearby road where park officials picked him up. "It was probably that heavy backpack of his," Tasha said. "That shit can be painful." "And he left without saying goodbye?" I asked. "That's kind of weird." "Yes, unfortunately he had extreme abdominal pain, and we couldn't risk him staying for too long," Rowan said. "Thankfully there's a road close to this campsite, so he was safely transported to a hospital. Not the first time he bailed on our annual trip," Tasha said. "Remember when we tried to go to the Grand Canyon that one year? He canceled last minute to go to a friend's birthday party. A birthday party over the Grand Canyon. We all laughed over it, but something about the situation made me uneasy. I pulled out my phone, hoping that a nearby road meant there'd be cell service, but there was nothing. We packed and left for our second day of hiking soon after. The trail was beginning to turn uphill, and as we continued I noticed more and more of the woven trees, some closer to the trail this time. Grant and I separated from the rest of the group again, where I decided to bring up my uneasiness. "Babe, this hike has been kind of weird so far," I said. "There's the whole thing with Trevor leaving early, and I know it sounds dumb, but there weren't any stars in the sky last night. Maybe it got cloudy," Grant said. "Maybe, but also there's something off about Rowan. Like he's cool, but I just get weird vibes, you know. He doesn't even hike with us. All trail guides are a little weird honestly," Grant said. "Although come to think of it, we haven't really seen any wildlife so far. No bird calls, no squirrels, nothing bigger than a ladybug at least. Yeah, it's just very unique compared to what we're used to," I said, breathing hard. The uphill hiking was starting to wear on me. "Do you think we could take a small break?" Whoa, look at that," Grant exclaimed. This time I didn't need him to point. It was a woven tree maybe 8 feet wide, growing directly to the right of the trail. He ran to the tree while I huffed and puffed to catch up. From up close I could see the intricacies in its trunk. Contrary to what I had assumed from a distance, the trunk itself was uneven in thickness. The threads of wood bulged out and folded in like an amateur had woven it. Each individual log climbed, twisted, branched off, branched together, even looped back into itself. There were multiple crevices large enough to fit a human in, and I was tempted to try when Grant called from the other side of the tree. "Ash, what is it, babe? Remember how I said there wasn't any wildlife?" Grant's voice teetered between fascination and fear. I think I found why. I walked to where Grant stood and nearly fell backward. Fastened to the tree was a deer, or what was left of it. The animal had clearly been dead for a while. Its skin was largely rotted away, its skeleton sticking out from behind the decayed flesh. At least, that is, for the upper half of its body. The bottom half was fused with the tree. Sandy gray bark had seemingly grown around its stomach and hind legs, reminding me of the sundew, a carnivorous plant which slowly wrapped its nectar-lined leaves around unlucky insects. Except this was much larger than a sundew. Looking closer, I could see fresh growth around the part of the deer that touched the bark, almost like the tree was slowly swallowing its meal whole. A putrid smell invaded my nostrils, threatening to give my breakfast a reappearance. We stood there in silence. "I think we should stay away from the trees," Grant finally said. "You think?" We ended up waiting for everyone else to warn them about the tree. I couldn't fathom how a plant was doing such a thing. Either the deer was already dead when it was attached, or the tree somehow immobilized and killed it. Maybe a hunter left it there and forgot, and the tree just grew around it, Tasha suggested. When she saw the deer, I don't think trees can do that, Spencer said. Trevor would know, he's the one studying botany, Jamie said. By the way, did Rowan go ahead of y'all? Grant and I looked at each other. We haven't seen him since this morning. I thought he was with you three, I said. No, he went ahead of us, Tasha said. Frankly, I don't know how he does it. He's probably twice our age, and kicking our asses. On this uphill part too, how did he get past Grant and I without us noticing? I wondered out loud. Maybe he took a different path, Grant suggested. After all, he makes dinner for us. Maybe there's secret tunnels to get there quicker. Secret tunnels, I said. Hey, it's not my dumbest idea. We got ready to continue our hike, but before we left I looked at the deer again. Its empty eye socket stared back at me, its jawbone hung open in a frozen scream. I got the same feeling in my stomach again, the churning feeling that with every step we took, the deeper we went into the belly of a beast. Perhaps out of fear, the five of us stuck together for the rest of the day. The trail continued steadily uphill, which meant lots of rest breaks. Compared to the morning, the afternoon was uneventful, although I couldn't help but notice the woven trees were replacing more and more of the other flora. We were almost at the next campsite when Spencer stopped to get a rock out of his hiking boot. You all go ahead, I know you're hungry for dinner, he said to us. And hungry we were. Rowan had cooked a pot of mouth-watering mac and cheese, which we instantly devoured. For a moment, I was able to forget about all the strange happenings from that day. But the same couldn't be said for everyone else. How did you get up here so quickly? Jamie asked Rowan. Ashley and Grant didn't even see you hike past them. You know, Jamie, Rowan said slowly, the more you hike this trail, the more you become a part of it. Jamie laughed. What does that even mean? It means I'm your trail guide. You don't need to worry about such things. Rowan's voice dripped with agitation. What about the tree that was eating a deer? Rowan paused, the question clearly catching him off guard. I saw something flash through his eyes. Was it fear? Or maybe anger? But before he spoke, Spencer walked up to us. Hey y'all, I'm feeling a little under the weather. I think I'm going to turn in for the night, he said. Do you want me to get a bowl of mac and cheese for you, Spence? Tasha asked. Nah, I'm good. Not much of an appetite. Okay, well, make sure you at least eat something, babe. We sat around the fire and chatted through the evening, but a lot of the energy that we'd had the first night was gone. Rowan kept much more to himself this time, as if he'd gotten sick of us. Soon, Tasha retreated to her tent to take care of Spencer, and a few minutes later Rowan left to his, leaving Grant, Jamie, and I. Is it just me, or is something up with him? Jamie asked us once Rowan was out of earshot. By that point it was almost dark. I mean, there's clearly something he knows that we don't. Honestly, he's the least of our worries right now. This forest is weird as hell, I said. Very true. Jamie glanced upward. Look up. Still no stars in the sky. Grant and I followed her gaze. Jamie was right. The sky was a navy blue. Dark enough that there should have been some stars, but bright enough that we could tell it wasn't cloudy. What could even explain this? I asked. There's giant carnivorous trees and no stars in the sky. Not to mention that we hiked uphill for like 8 hours and it feels like we've gotten nowhere. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the fire's crackling flames gradually reducing to embers. Well, we've completed a third of the hike. Grant finally said, maybe we can power through to the end and we'll be done with the weirdness. Damn, man, I really need another joint, Jamie said. We went back to our tent soon after, but I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, the events of the day replaying itself in my head. All of this weirdness was too complicated, a math equation 3 grades too high for me to understand. Wherever we were, clearly the rules here were different from the outside world. While I prayed everything would turn out alright, my mind kept wandering back to the lifeless eye sockets of the deer, wondering if it was an omen for what waited ahead. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Tasha screaming. What do you mean he decided to leave? I heard Rowan's voice respond, although it was inaudible through the tent fabric. Grant stirred next to me. I'll go check it out, I told him, trying to remove the sleep from my system. I climbed out of the tent, where through the gray morning light I saw Rowan hunched over the fire, cooking breakfast. Next to him stood Tasha, tears streaming down her cheeks. You are seriously mistaken if you think I'm gonna believe that for a second, Tasha said, her voice breaking. What is there not to believe? He did what I told you, Rowan said simply. BS. Tasha kicked over the pan, spilling half-made powdered eggs all over the ground. Rowan didn't even flinch. I looked to my right and saw Jamie watching from her tent. We locked eyes and mouthed what the hell to each other. If you don't want breakfast, fine by me, Rowan said. I'll see you tonight at the next campsite. He began to put on his backpack. Wait, I called. What the hell happened? Rowan looked at me. Last night, Spencer opted to leave. He was feeling sick. Rowan's voice was monotone, like he was reading from a script. They walked to a nearby road where park officials picked him up, and without another word, Rowan started down the trail, leaving looks of disbelief on our faces. Jamie and I walked to Tasha. She stood by the fire, fists clenched, watching Rowan as he left. She seemed to consider following him, but remained still. What happened to Spencer? Jamie asked. Her voice hushed. The tears started flowing. I don't know, Tasha wailed. He slept before me because he was feeling sick. I fell asleep right after, and then when I woke up, he was gone, along with all of his stuff. You don't think he left because he was feeling sick? Jamie asked. No, I would have heard him packing up, and he would have at least given me a goodbye if he wanted to leave. Tasha looked at us, gritting her teeth. Someone took him, and I bet it was Rowan, that sleazy little man. We'll find Spencer, I assured her. He couldn't have gone far. Tasha nodded, wiping the tears from her eyes. I'll check back down the trail we came from. Maybe you two can look around the camp and up the trail. Sounds good. I'll get Grant awake so he can look too, I said. We split off, and I returned to the tent, where Grant had now sat up in his sleeping bag and was rubbing his eyes. What's going on? He asked. Spencer went missing. We're trying to find him, I said. Grant seemed to think a bit before responding. Ash, we should leave. What? Why? The person who made it last to the campsite each day went missing the next morning. Grant said. Trevor was the last one on the first day, and Spencer was the last one on the second. So you think we're in a sick version of the Amazing Race? Something like that. Ash, it's the only thing we know. But if we get to the campsites first, we might be able to, and leave Tasha and Jamie behind so they can get kidnapped. Or worse, I snapped. Ash, please, Grant begged. Once we get out of the forest, or get cell service, or something we can call the park. But we need to survive until then. Please, I don't want to lose you too. There were footsteps from outside the tent. Did they manage to find Spencer already? I opened the flap and saw Tasha, but no Spencer. You're back quickly, I said. No luck. Tasha sucked in her breath. The trail back. It's blocked. Blocked. By what? One of those giant trees. It had fallen over the path. I couldn't find a way around. My heart leapt to my throat. So that means... Tasha nodded. The only way we can go is forward. Jamie returned a little later, her search fruitless as well. Solemnly, we began to pack up in preparation for the day's hike. With only 4 of us remaining, and with Rowan long gone, our group suddenly felt tiny and exposed. This was perhaps in part due to our silence. We were aware that something was terribly wrong, and yet too afraid to talk about it, almost as if speaking would beckon the forest's rage. We quietly went through the motions of packing, a ritual written into our muscle memory. Grant finished packing first, and part of me wondered if he'd leave us behind. When Tasha spoke up, you 3 can go ahead, I'll stay behind and keep looking, she said. Are you sure, Tasha? You don't want one of us to hang back? I asked. Tasha shook her head. The only way we're going to get out of here is to finish the hike, and I don't want to hold anyone else behind. I'll catch up with y'all later. I looked over at Grant, and he met my gaze. At least it's not us, his eyes told me. I looked away. Jamie, Grant, and I started on the hike a few minutes later. Somehow, the trail had grown even steeper, my legs aching with protest. We must have been thousands of feet up by then. Do you think Tasha will go missing too? Jamie asked us. Her voice begged for reassurance, but we had none to give. I don't know, Grant said, but if the previous nights are anything to go off, then it's possible. Then shouldn't we go back and make sure she's okay? Jamie said, I don't think we can do anything. Spencer went missing while he was in a tent with another person. Grant sucked in his breath. I think all we can do is finish the hike and report the missing people. How many more days of hiking do we have left? 4, I think, Grant said. The implication of that number wasn't lost on me. We continued hiking, step by step, one foot in front of the other. The sounds of crunching dirt, heavy breathing, the occasional unscrewing of a bottle lid, they all began to blend together. The trail never turned, never changed in slope, it only continued forward, and up until it disappeared between the surrounding trees. And the trees were all woven trees. No other plant species seemed to grow anymore, not even undergrowth ferns or weeds. The trees extended as far as the eye could see, like stalagmites in a giant cave or teeth in a giant mouth. The day was long, hot, and exhausting. We ran out of water partway through since Rowan usually filled our bottles for us during meals. The lack of a breakfast that morning also ensured our energy quickly depleted. We ate all the remaining dried fruit and granola bars from our packs, but even that wasn't enough to stave off exhaustion. Finally, we reached the campsite, with Rowan standing over the fire, cooking like usual. "Welcome," Rowan said with a suspiciously normal voice. "Dinner will be ready soon. Feel free to unwind and stop being fake with us." Jamie interrupted. "We know what kind of game you're playing, and we know what you're doing with our friends." "Oh, do you now?" Rowan said, his expression unchanging. "If this is how you want to speak, I can always leave you behind to starve, or Aunt." And I darted eyes, fear exchanging between our glances. "And no, we didn't mean it like that," Grant stammered. "Yeah, we appreciate you cooking for us," I said. Rowan gave us a knowing smile. "Thought so." He put on the pot lid. "Hope you three like couscous." We wolfed down the meal as Rowan watched, perhaps expecting us to comment on his cooking. Dinner was good like usual, although I couldn't help but feel that the meal served as meat hung from a pole, motivating us like we were greyhounds in a deadly dog race. We sat around the fire in silence. I heard something crunch behind me. Soft, irregular footsteps came from the trail, like a drunk person had wandered into the forest. I turned and saw Tasha stumbling toward us, although she could have passed for a ghost. Bags hung from her eyes, her skin eerily pale, her lips thin and dry. "Tasha," Jamie said, standing up. Her expression quickly grew dark. "Did you?" Tasha looked at us with eyes that were 100 years old. "He's gone," she said, her voice rasping. Tasha's uncharacteristic pronouncement of defeat scared me more than anything from before then. "Do you want some water?" I asked. "You look exhausted." Tasha gave a slight nod, and I handed her my water bottle. "I'm going to turn in early tonight," she said, unscrewing the bottle. "I have a killer headache that's not going away." Jamie and I exchanged worried glances. "We should keep watch over her," she said to me, quiet enough that Rowan wouldn't hear. I nodded, then looked at Grant, beckoning him to come over. "Should we stay outside her tent, or stay in with her?" I asked. Jamie looked over at Tasha, who was still gulping water. "I think we should stay in the tent, and stay awake. If Spencer went missing without Tasha noticing, then who knows what happened to cause that." The idea didn't excite Tasha, but she was too tired to protest. "Just don't stay up all night giggling, or something," she told them after the tent was set up and she laid in her sleeping bag. "We'll just be sitting here to make sure everything's okay," Jamie assured her. Even though the tent was meant for multiple people, it was tough fitting the four of us. Tasha's body took up half the floor space, while the rest of us sat pressed against each other. It was uncomfortable, sure, but fear of what would happen otherwise kept us going. We opened one of the windows towards Rowan's tent so we could see if he came. We chatted to stave off the silence, but before long Tasha fell asleep, and we stopped. The entire world was dead around us. No crickets chirped, no leaves rustled in the wind. The only sound was Tasha's soft breathing. If I didn't know better, I would have believed we were the only living creatures for miles. Time marched onward. The temperature dropped, making me wrap my arms around my legs. Fatigue crept in, but anxiety kept it at bay. I counted seconds to keep track of time, but fell off somewhere in the thousands. Hours passed, or it could have been 30 minutes. But the next thing I remember is Jamie nudging me. "I can't hear her breathing anymore," she whispered. Ice shot down my spine. Jamie was right. Somewhere during the sluggish mudflow of time, Tasha's soft hum had stopped. I reached over and gently placed my hand on top of the sleeping bag. There was still something inside. "Tasha," I said. "Tasha." She didn't move. "Brant, you have your flashlight, right?" Jamie whispered. "Yep." There was a click, and what I saw in the light will forever haunt me. Tasha was still in her sleeping bag, but her face and neck was covered with something. Sandy gray, furrowed tree bark seemed to have replaced her skin, removing all of her facial features, like a woodcarver's mannequin. Like the deer, like the wood of the woven trees. I couldn't sleep all night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tasha's blank, wooden face boring into my soul. What was once a bright, passionate young woman and a close friend had been reduced to tree bark. Knowing that Trevor and Spencer had likely met the same fate, I wanted to cry but was too numb to feel. The full realization had yet to hit, but I could see it barreling towards me in slow motion. There's no way half of our group just died, right? My mind frantically searched for answers, an alternative explanation, but instead all it came up with was the dead deer fused to the tree. The events immediately after we saw Tasha's body are a blur to me. Someone screamed, maybe it was me. I think Jamie tried peeling the bark off to no avail, then tried CPR. Knowing he likely wouldn't help, we woke Rowan, but while doing so Tasha's body disappeared. Rowan didn't even bother lying to us, he just returned to his tent. Jamie tried tackling him, but he easily tossed her aside. "You're the one I'm looking the most forward to," he'd said to her, before disappearing into the tent. I felt Grant nudge me. I opened my eyes, although I'm not sure if they were closed to begin with. It was still dark. "You awake, Ash?" came his voice. I made a noise that was something between a grunt and a gurgle. "We should go," he said. "Though where?" "To the next campsite," Grant said, rolling his sleeping back. While it's still early, I rolled over and groaned, my unrested body complaining, but I followed suit, rolling up my sleeping bag, sleeping pad, quickly changing my clothes, and putting on my hiking boots. In minutes we had everything packed, and we were on the trail, illuminated using Grant's flashlight. It was then that I realized something was off. "We're leaving Jamie behind," I said. Grant sucked in his breath, as if bracing for my reaction. "Yes, just to make sure we're safe. So we're leaving her to die. If it's not her, it'll be one of us," Grant said through gritted teeth. "Is that any better?" "No, but at least we could have tried to figure out how to keep us all alive. Ash, we know the rules of this game now. There's nothing left to figure out. You don't know that. The three of us could have come up with something, and now we're not going to try. It doesn't matter now. I made sure she wouldn't catch up to us," Grant said. It was then that I noticed the faint but distinct smell of lighter fluid coming from his clothes. "Grant, what do you mean by that?" I asked, my stomach twisting. Even through the faint morning light I could see Grant grimace. "All of her stuff," he began. "I took what I could and set the rest on fire, far away from camp." I felt my legs collapse, my vision blurred. This was not the Grant I knew. He might have still been physically alive next to me, but the real Grant was dead like the others. "You did what?" "Ash, please," Grant begged. "This is for the two of us. We need to. Are you going to burn my stuff tomorrow, too? Are you going to leave me behind just so you can get one more day to live in this hell? Ash, Jamie's blood will be on your hands," I screamed. The dam broke, and tears poured down my cheeks. "You greedy excuse of a boyfriend." We were both silent, as the weight of my words set in. Between my sobbing gasps for breath, I could hear Grant crying as well. My head pounded, maybe from dehydration, exhaustion, anger, or a mix of all three. Regret began to fill me, but I couldn't muster the courage to apologize. 3 days of hiking stress poured onto the trail in a muddy river. Our sobs echoed through the cold, silent, cursed forest that surrounded us. "I plan to propose to you," Grant finally said, his voice strained. "When we got to the top, on the 4th day of the hike, today, I wanted that to make me happy, but it didn't. Even after everything that happened." I asked, "If these truly are our final days, then I might have." "Yeah." I wiped the tears from my eyes. "Are you still going to do it?" A dumb question, really, but it was all I could think of to say. The faintest of smiles sneaked onto Grant's face. "You wouldn't want a greedy excuse of a husband, would you?" I didn't know how to respond. We sat there in silence, leftover tears pit-patting to the ground. The sky was slowly lighting up now, the horizon glowing a vibrant yellow in anticipation of the sun's entrance. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Ashley," Grant said, his voice breaking again. "I guess that's why I did that, to make sure that I have as much time with you as I can." His voice begged for a response, but I had none to give. "I'm sorry, running won't work," I said. Grant lowered his head. "I know, but it was the only thing I could think of. There's 3 more nights," I said. "Either we die doing what Rowan wants, or we die trying to escape." Now it was Grant who didn't know how to respond. The sun's rays began to caress us as we sat there in silent contemplation. I looked over at Grant, whose head remained lowered. How did we get to this point? I thought, how did this hike destroy us all, even though still alive? There were footsteps from the trail. I looked up and saw Jamie walking towards us, carrying only her tent bag. Y'all wouldn't happen to know where my stuff went, would you? She called. You can use my stuff, I said, slipping off my backpack. I probably won't need it soon anyways. Ash, please don't say that, Jamie said, closing the distance to us. I shrugged. I mean, what else is there to say? Actually, last night I got an idea, Jamie said, leaning in. I think Rowan is pretty clearly responsible for what's happening. I nodded. He made that clear last night. So, how hard would it be to kill him? We continued the hike. The trail had turned even more uphill, the sun scorching us relentlessly. As we trekked, with little food and water remaining, our physical and mental acuity deteriorated. We distracted ourselves from our sorry state by forming a plan. The plan was simple. 2 of us would hike ahead of the other and meet Rowan at the campsite, where he'd be cooking like usual. The 2 would distract Rowan with trivial conversation. Meanwhile, the 3rd person would sneak around the side of the camp, and when his guard was down, stab Rowan in the throat with Grant's knife. There was only one thing to figure out, who the 3rd person would be, as they would put themselves at risk by being the last to camp. I think it makes the most sense for me to be that person, Jamie said. Are you sure, Jamie? I asked. Rowan knows that you 2 left before me, so he'd be less suspicious if you arrived first. Jamie explained. And also, I suggested killing Rowan in the first place, so it makes sense for me to take the high-risk role. My stomach twisted itself into knots. As the day trudged on, Rowan's face imprinted itself into my brain, his hollow green eyes and wooden smile tormenting me. What if it doesn't work? I thought, what would he do to us? Would we suffer a fate worse than the others? But as I thought back to the others, Trevor, Spencer, and now Tasha, an inner rage boiled within me. It was enough to keep me going, to keep me hiking on the fumes of stale trail mix and warm, metallic-tasting water. The possibility that Rowan wasn't involved in their disappearances entered my mind, but his attitude from the previous day told me culpability was highly probable. At the very least, he was clearly indifferent about us dying. That provided me with the justification to see through our plan. The day wore on. The sun crested, then lowered in the sky, and before long we saw the smoke trail of a campfire ahead of us. There it is, Grant said. I heard Jamie take a deep breath next to me. Let's do it, she said, undeterred. Grant. And I marched up, my legs threatening to collapse from anxiety. Rowan was at the fire, as expected, cooking something that smelled like fish. Welcome, he called to us. Only 2 more days after today. Isn't that exciting? I can't believe it's almost done already, I said with an unconvincing smile. You should see some of the pictures we got today, Grant said, standing close to Rowan. He pulled out his plastic bag of photos. There are woven trees everywhere. It was hard not to stop and take a picture of every single one. While Grant showed Rowan through the many photos he'd taken, I began setting up my tent close to the fire, making sure to create plenty of noise. As I did, my eyes darted between the surrounding trees as I set up, looking for signs of Jamie's presence. Nothing yet. The minutes marched on slower than they ever had. By that point, I was repeatedly disconnecting and reconnecting the tent poles, occasionally muttering obscenities and fake frustration. I could hear Grant continuing to show photos, Rowan's voice becoming increasingly more agitated. Also, while we were having lunch, there was this tree that vaguely looked like the Mona Lisa. Grant said, "See, you can sort of make out the face and smile. That looks the same as the other 20 photos you've shown me." You mean you don't see it? Grant sounded disappointed. Whether it was real or fake disappointment, I couldn't tell. I heard the soft, almost inaudible sound of someone running. Grant, respectfully, I think I've seen anew. I looked up, Jamie standing behind Rowan, her arm wrapped around his neck with the knife pointed directly at his throat. Jamie strained from effort, and I realized what was happening. The knife wasn't going in. Jamie wounded her arm again and tried stabbing again, but the knife only bounced off Rowan's neck with a hollow thunk. Rowan stood there, a smile creeping across his face. Go on, try it again. Jamie tried cutting with the knife's edge this time, and the same thing happened. The knife simply slid off, like his skin was made of stone. Jamie tried again, and again across his face, in his back, each time becoming more and more frantic, tears forming in her eyes. The knife did no damage. Rowan only stood there, a look of bliss plastered across his face, as if receiving a massage. Hard to cut wood with a knife made for flesh. Jamie crumpled to the ground, tears streaming down her cheeks. Rowan began to roar with laughter. Do you seriously think that of the thousands I've devoured, none thought to try that? Grant. And I could only watch, frozen, as Rowan flicked his wrist, and Jamie stopped moving. Her skin was now a furrowed sandy gray, her facial features plastered with tree bark. Rowan had turned Jamie into wood. No point waiting on that one, he said with simple annoyance. He looked at Grant, and a good luck on tomorrow's hike, and then he was gone. Tears begged to spill, but I no longer had the energy to cry. Grant said something, but I no longer had the energy to hear. I fell on my knees, drawing blood as a result, but I no longer had the energy to feel. I could do nothing but watch as my best friend's body turned into dust and was absorbed by the ground. How could this happen? What cursed object did we possess? What dark ritual had we done? What divine force had we slighted? How could the universe, God, Zeus, anything, decide that this is the fate we deserved? That I deserved to watch as we were murdered one by one, knowing I will suffer the same fate? That we deserved to be torn apart in the same place we'd met, on the hiking trail? I do not know how long I sat there. The waves of tragedies had broken any lingering sense of time. But the next thing I remember is reaching into my pocket and feeling Jamie's one remaining possession, the lighter she'd given me on the first day. I pulled it out, the bright red color of its tube contrasting against my dirty, bruised hand. It was then that I noticed something else. The bracelet. The bracelet was still in the same spot it had been since the first day. Somehow, I had forgotten about it entirely, not even bothering to take it off at night. But as I pulled on the bracelet, I noticed that removing it was no longer a possibility. The woven stick seemed to have wrapped tighter around my wrist, enough that my hand no longer fit through. As I thought back to that first day, the day Rowan gave us the bracelets, I realized that had been the first step in our murders. How he turns us into wood. An idea surfaced, but it would be risky. Then again, risk was all I had left to bet on, right? I heard Grant walk up behind me. Ash, I need to tell you something. I'm going to stay behind, he said. You deserve an extra day more than me. What's an extra day worth if I can't spend it with you? I couldn't see his face, but I knew he was smiling. I thought about what you said, and you were right. I played the game Rowan wanted us to play. Grant sat in the dirt next to me. You did what you thought was best for us, I said, at the expense of Jamie. He said. He covered his face with his hands. Damn, they're actually all gone, aren't they? Maybe they're all alive somewhere, I said, but I didn't believe it. Neither did Grant. You remember how I was the one to find this trail, right? Frankly, anything before the hike is a distant memory to me now. Lee really took everything for granted. I know that I might not have done a great job expressing it, but the guilt completely wrecked me. I hoped that I could at least save you. You didn't know, I whispered, putting my arm around his shoulder, but maybe you'll survive. Grant said, his voice breaking through his tears. Maybe he lets the last person live. That was wishful thinking to me, but I didn't say it, so I want that to be you. Rowan doesn't deserve the validation of me being the last one. We sat in silence for a long time. The world was completely still. The sun began to set, staining the sky with vibrant pinks and oranges. A calming aura filled the landscape. Even in the land of the woven trees, the sunsets are still beautiful. I'm sorry for calling you a greedy excuse of a boyfriend, I finally said. Grant rested his head on my shoulder. But I'm also not gonna let you die, I continued. I don't know if, well, I doubt it will work, but I have an idea that might keep us alive. Grant perked. What's the idea? You need to go ahead of me tomorrow, I said. I held out my wrist. I think our bracelets are the key to breaking free. Rowan wasn't there the next morning. Perhaps the attempted murder made him uneasy, or he wished to see us suffer from deprivation, or both, but it certainly made the day's hike even more difficult. We had no water or calorie sources after last night's dinner. The uphill hike was relentless, and we frequently stopped to avoid passing out. But despite our parched tongues and pounding headaches, we pressed on. I questioned the timing of my plan. I hoped that attempting it at the campsite, where I'd be marked for death, would break the methodological killing system that Rowan had. Of course, there was the possibility that once I was the last, there's no stopping my death, but I knew I'd have one chance no matter. When I did it, it was just picking the most impactful time. When we reached the next campsite, it was basically dark. It didn't even look like a campsite. It was just a flat plot of dirt, similar to all the ones before it, but with no campfire or Rowan in sight. Nonetheless, as soon as Grant stepped foot onto the plot, a wave of nausea swept over my body, and I knew the clock was ticking. I followed him. "Okay, do your plan," Grant said. He turned on his flashlight. "It's already night, so we have to hurry. Do you still have the knife?" I asked. Grant handed me the same knife that Jamie had used. I brought the knife to my wrist and began sawing at the bracelet, hoping the blade would cut through the twigs. It didn't. I kept trying to cut through in multiple ways, from multiple different angles, but the knife didn't even make an incision. Hard to cut wood with a knife made for flesh. I remembered Rowan saying, "Is it working?" Grant asked. "No," I said, desperation creeping in. My headache and nausea seemed to intensify. I tried to force my hand through the bracelet again, but it wouldn't come off. My thumb bone caught on it. "Ouch," Grant said, pacing up and down. "Do you still have the container you used for the lighter fluid?" Grant nodded, taking off his backpack. He handed me a luckily heavy metal bottle. I braced myself for what came next. Placing my left hand, the hand with the bracelet, on the ground, I held the bottle in my right hand. Every instinct in my body fought against me, but I knew what I had to do. I closed my eyes, wound my right arm, and swung to the ground. There was a hollow clunk as it struck my hand, then an explosion of pain. "What are you doing?" Grant cried. My thumb bone screamed, but it wasn't enough. The nausea was starting to overwhelm me, but I pushed past it. Biting my shirt, I wound up the bottle again and swung down. I heard a sickening crack, and my vision turned red. My thumb was bent at an unnatural angle. Every nerve in my hand reprimanded me for my decision, but as I pulled on the woven bracelet, it slipped past the shattered bone and off my fingers, hitting the dirt with a soft plat. Even though the hand pain remained, as soon as the bracelet fell off, my headache and nausea disappeared like a potent painkiller. For the first time in 5 days, I felt free. I looked over at Grant, who was staring at my hand and the bracelet with his mouth agape. I was about to speak when I saw a shadow moving behind him. "Across 150 years, I don't think anyone's tried that," came a voice. Rowan's voice. Grant turned around, and with his flashlight, we could see Rowan standing there, but he looked different somehow. "I have to say, the extent you're willing to go is admirable," Rowan continued, starting to walk towards us. "But unfortunately, the bracelet is not the only weapon I possess." As he came, I heard the sound of sticks cracking and snapping, and then I realized what was happening. He's getting bigger. With each step, Rowan grew in size, vines crawling down his leg and extending its length, his arms expanding to inhuman levels. His clothes were quickly pulled apart, and that's when Rowan's final form became visible. He stood twice our height, his body woven with wrapped vines from head to toe like the trees that have surrounded us for so long. What was once a human face had become a carved wooden slate with hollow eye sockets and no mouth. Rowan's right arm had grown a handle with a flat wooden blade attached to the end, a hatchet. Grant fell to the ground in terror. Rowan looked at him. "You have nothing to fear," he told Grant, his voice deeper and more hollow than before. "You made it first. Ashley didn't." Then he looked back at me and began to charge, his right arm winding up to strike. I scrambled into a run as fast as my legs allowed. There was a whoosh, followed by a sharp burst of pain across my back. Rowan's hatchet had grazed me. If I were a second slower, it would have sliced my spine. I barreled into the darkening forest, my left hand hanging limply by my side, my right arm still carrying the lighter fluid. Blood soaked the back of my shirt, but adrenaline overrode any pain I might have felt. I ran as fast as I could in spite of the 5 days of hiking, the shadowy forms of woven trees streaking past my vision. Gradually, the creaking sound of Rowan chasing me began to fade, but I did not stop. I continued sprinting downhill, taking extra care not to slip and tumble down. Something burst out of a woven tree to my left. Instinctively, I ducked, and I felt the wind of Rowan's hatchet fly inches over my head. I fell to the ground and watched in horror as Rowan emerged from the trunk of the tree, the intertwined logs parting like curtains welcoming a king. Seeing me in my vulnerable state, Rowan laughed. Do you not understand that you are facing a god in this domain? He wounded his arm again. I mustered all my remaining energy to propel my body. The hatchet cracked against the ground where I'd just been. The momentum carried me into a tumble down the endless slope, my left hand exploding in pain as my body weight laid on it. As I rolled, I saw Rowan standing, watching, and even though he had no mouth, I could tell he was smiling. I eventually came to a stop against a tree, where I quickly got up in fear of Rowan emerging again. Through the haze of my pain, I saw something lying on the ground, the lighter fluid I'd been holding, which had slid down the hill alongside me. I reached into my pocket, felt Jamie's lighter, which had somehow stayed in, and a plan began to form. I grabbed the lighter fluid bottle with my good hand and unscrewed the cap with my teeth. Running around the trunk, I poured lighter fluid all over the wood, making sure to cover as much surface area as possible. Once I had emptied the container, I stood by the tree waiting, tightly gripping Jamie's lighter. Minutes passed. My heart was pounding, almost painfully so. By now it was almost completely dark, so I listened closely for the sound of shifting wood. Blood dripped to the ground from my back. Part of me began to wonder if Rowan had given up chase, maybe deciding to go for Grant instead. There was movement in the corner of my eye. I moved back, but it wasn't fast enough. The blade struck directly across my chest, the sheer force causing ribs to snap like twigs. Blood sprayed everywhere, including on myself. My vision blurred. I collapsed to the ground from sheer shock. In the haze of pain, I heard the sound of Rowan emerging from the tree, the scraping of thousands of sticks rubbing together. I heard him walk up to me and say something, and then a creaking sound as he wound his hatchet. With all my remaining strength, I raised my right arm, which was still clutching the lighter. I felt my hand touch the fluid-soaked trunk of the tree, and then I switched on the lighter. I felt heat as the trunk burst into flame. Orange light flooded my vision, and then I heard a sound. It took me some time to realize but I think it was the sound of Rowan screaming. Despite the pain, I managed to lift my head. I saw Rowan's figure dancing in front of me, fire engulfing his entire body. He was trying to put the flames out. It was futile. Eventually, the flames died down, having consumed all of their fuel, and Rowan fell to the ground as a charred husk. Black soot fell on my body, and then the forest burst into flames. It was the biggest fire show that I, or maybe anyone, has ever seen. One by one, cones of flame exploded up the woven trees, hungrily consuming the gray wood. The fires climbed hundreds of feet like pillars from hell. Sweat collected on my forehead from the heat. The acrid smell of burning was sharp. The sound of roaring flames was deafening, and the sheer amount of light was overwhelming. But as I watched the spectacle unfurl, lying on the ground with cold, blood-soaked dirt beneath me, it was beautiful. The thousands of fire pillars burning in sync, glorious like the death of a god should be. And then the fire was gone. Cold air swept over me. I still laid on the ground, staring up at darkness. I brought my hand to my stomach and felt blood flowing from the wound. I tried to sit up, but exhaustion tied me to the earth. I wondered if I would die like this, having defeated Rowan yet doomed to be his final victim. But as I lay there, taking deep, painful breaths, I noticed something. Crickets. They sang a chorus I didn't know I missed. Yet as I listened, I felt peace. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and the night sky came into focus. And as I gazed upon the heavens, littered with thousands of twinkling stars, I realized I made it. I made it out of the forest. Consciousness began to slip away, yet I smiled, embracing my fate. Someone ran over. Grant. Oh my God, we need to get you to a hospital, he said when he saw me. He pulled out his phone. The others, I mustered despite the pain of my broken ribs. I don't know. I couldn't find them, he said, putting the phone to his ear. We can report them missing. Maybe they'll be found. But something told me they were gone. And as I bathed in the starlight, I realized what it was. Maybe the blood loss was playing tricks on my mind. But beyond the night sky, I felt thousands of souls escape to a final slumber, my friends included. And, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I cried.